Hello, my name is Dr. David Hopper, and today I'm going to take you through the basics of heart rate variability. I want to talk to you about what it is and why every single person should be using it. So, before we go ahead and get started into this course, I want to tell you a little bit about who I am. So, my name is Dr. David Hopper. I am a practicing chiropractor as well as an orofacial myofunctional therapist. What that means is basically somebody who does rehabilitation for the mouth, nose, and airway. Um, I'm clinics in the Chicagoland area, and I am a professor at the National University of Health Sciences in their doctorate programs. I work with obstructive sleep apnea, TMJ dysfunction patients, and I use heart rate variability as an assessment tool for everybody. I have gone through many different training programs. I've even had my own app, my own devices, and all this with heart rate variability. So it is something I'm very passionate about. And then I am also involved in research, not surprising that that also has to do with heart rate variability. So here we go. Um, this course is just going to be on the basics of heart rate variability, and we are going to go through these items right here. So first, the history of heart rate variability and the power of it, right? What can we actually do with it? Then we're going to talk about the science of HRV, and I'm going to try to keep it light. We're not going to try to go horribly deep there. And then we're going to talk about how to actually measure HRV, interpretation of HRV. So what do we do after we measure? And finally, the application of HRV in practice. So this can be for chiropractors, doctors, physical therapists. It can be for coaches of any kind, anybody who wants to get their clients, their patients performing at their best and having a great objective measure. That is what HRV is wonderful for. So again, nature of this content, this is just a general overview that we are going to do today. This is not an in-depth dive into HRV. If you want that, I do offer online courses on HRV, and I would strongly recommend that you go ahead and check one of those out. So let's get into this with the history and power of HRV. So heart rate variability, a brief history. So we can see in 1773 was the first time that it was thought that there was a variation between heartbeats. And that's quite amazing to think, right? That in 1773, just simply from palpation, they were able to detect that there was actually a variation in the heartbeat. Okay. Then in 1895, they came out with the ECG, which we still use today. And that was the first time that we could actually see the electrical activity of the heart actually displayed out on paper. So we could actually see that variation as well in between each beat. And we're going to get to talking about what exactly that means in just a moment. In the 1930s, they came out with something called PPG or photoplasmography. And what PPG is for anybody who wears a heart rate device, so this is heart rate or heart rate variability device that flashes a light into your skin. What it does is it reflects that light back, and we are capturing how much light gets absorbed, or we are rather figuring how much light gets absorbed versus how much is reflected back. And that is an extremely accurate measure of what your heart is doing. So what that heart rate is actually doing. So we can pull a number of very accurate things from there, including heart rate variability. Then next we have a chest strap monitor, which was developed in the 1970s by Polar. Polar still being one of the leaders in the industry. And that was a mobile ECG. So that is a very accurate chest strap monitor that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And then in the 1990s, we started with the wearable heart rate monitors. And in the 2000s, um, these, these wearable monitors started to become capable of transmitting what we call R to R intervals. So that is what we need to actually be able to pull heart rate variability data. All right. And what I'm trying to convey with this is that HRV is nothing new. Okay. HRV has been around for quite some time. We've known about it, and it's been used in medicine actually for quite some time. So there are over 30,000 publications on heart rate variability. And since 2016, we have just been seeing that number just increase and increase and increase. And a lot of that is because the accessibility of HRV has just gone through the roof with with these mobile applications that are capable of capturing HRV data and the amount of devices. Okay, so again, HRV, the most powerful biometric, right, is far from new. It is just newly available. Okay, and this guy is exactly how I feel when I get to talk about HRV. I am so excited about it, and it is so great. I think everybody needs to be using it. Every patient, every doctor, every single person should be using HRV on a regular basis. Okay, so what is heart rate variability? Now that we've been talking about this HRV term, well, first of all, let's start that heart rate variability is not heart rate. Okay, so HRV, we do add the V in there for a reason. A lot of people that I talk to, I will begin talking about HRV and they will say that they have heard of it. And very quickly into the conversation, I realized that they had heard of heart rate. They had not heard of heart rate variability. Pardon me. All right. So the two are not equal. So with heart rate variability, what we are talking about here, we have heart rate, which is the rate at which the heart beats. And we are looking at over a minute typically. Okay, so that is our BPM. Now, when we add in that variability, what we are talking about is the ability to adapt, the ability to vary, right? Um, so that's what we are talking about when we add in that V. Can we adapt to a situation? Can we adapt to a stressor on the body? And that is what HRV is looking at. Okay, so heart rate variability is the variation of time intervals between successive heartbeats measured over a given period of time. All right, so this is what an EKG strip is going to look like. And we can see heartbeat 1, heartbeat 2, heartbeat 3, and heartbeat 4. So those peaks that we are seeing is called the R spike or the QRS complex. And at the height of each peak, that R spike that we can call it, to the next one, we're going to call it an R to R interval. So what most people assume is that a heartbeat that is 60 beats per minute beats 1 second, 1 beat, 2 seconds, 2 beats, 3 seconds, 3 beats, like a perfect metronome. And that could not be farther from the truth. In fact, if that were the case, you would be extremely ill and extremely vulnerable to disease, and possibly even just not with us at all, if you survive it, if you are like that for any extended period of time. Okay, so what we want to see and what is typical is that we see interval 1 about 850 milliseconds, interval 2 980 milliseconds, interval 3 740 seconds, and so on and so forth, that we just average out to 60 beats within that minute, but they were all coming at a variable interval. Okay, so what is actually being measured? Again, we're looking at that time-space interval between heartbeats. That is actually heart our HRV. So that's what we're looking at. But why is that important? That is because that is a direct measure of our autonomic nervous system's function. Okay, so our autonomic nervous system is that system that runs everything that happens automatically within our bodies. And we're going to get into that in just a moment. Okay, but when we see HRV and we're looking at that ANS function, that is our body's ability to adapt to anything in our environment. Okay, and again, we're going to talk more about that in just a moment, right? But why should we care about this? Well, that is because low HRV is associated with all-cause mortality. Okay, if you Google HRV and just about anything, what you will see is that HRV, when your HRV decreases or goes down, your risk for just about every single killer goes up. Okay, the only thing that is of the 9 of the top 10 killers that is not directly associated is going to be accidents or unintentional injuries, right? And I'm going to argue that point. And the reason why is because if you are, we know that HRV is a lowered HRV means that you have a lowered reaction time. A higher HRV, you have a higher reaction time. So if you're somebody who is, say, driving in your car and somebody comes right in front of you, right, but you have a faster reaction time as a result of being a healthier person, as a result of being more adaptable in your autonomic nervous system, right? um, then you can react and possibly swerve and avoid an accident or make it a much lower impact in an accident, something like that. Okay. So that is where I can argue that every single cause of death, you are better off. I'm sorry, every single cause of death is associated with a low HRV, right? You are much better off with that high HRV, right? So the power of heart rate variability. So HRV is going to determine your ability to heal or recover. We know that people with a higher HRV are going to recover faster. We know that people with a lower HRV are going to recover slower, right? So let's start with something like a simple illness. If you're somebody who gets sick with the common cold, then and you have a high HRV, well, you might not even realize that that infection ever happened to you, right? That that virus ever entered your body because your body just does a great job of fending it off and you never really even get sick, right? And that's what a healthy person should do. That's what a healthy person's body should do. Okay, but say you actually do get sick. The higher HRV, the quicker you are going to recover from that illness. And on the opposite end, of course, we have somebody who has a lower HRV, and the person with that lower HRV is going to be sick longer. Okay, they're going to feel the effects of that longer because their body is not as capable of adapting and changing the processes to fight off a virus that invades it. Okay. Um, how about lifestyle changes, right? You start a new exercise program, you start a new diet, you start cold plunging as is so popular at the moment, right? We can actually use HRV as a source to tell us if this was a good lifestyle change or a bad lifestyle change. We can see what it does to us acutely, right? So what it does over the coming days when we start a new program like this, which initially any kind of a new program is going to lower our HRV, but over the long term, does it bring it up or does it keep it low? Okay. These are very important things for our health, right? And then how our health outcomes in general in our time to achieve that. So this is not only important for the individual taking their HRV, but also for the practitioner, right? Um, so again, if I want to do my care planning, I'm going to plan a longer care plan for somebody walking in the door with a lower HRV and vice versa, right? A shorter care plan, less intense care plan for somebody walking in the door with a higher HRV because I know that they will respond better, right? HRV can also accurately predict illness, injury, and performance. Absolutely crazy, right? So, injury and illness, HRV can predict illness or injury up to 2 days prior to the symptoms. And that is because our body will start reacting to any kind of stressor before we consciously become aware of these things. So our HRV is going to start going down when we are under larger amounts of stress, whether that be physical, chemical, or emotional stress, right? Our HRV is going to start going down. And that's showing that we are more prone to injury. We are more prone to illness. We are more prone to a decreased performance. In fact, regardless of what we do with a lower HRV, we are going to have a lower performance. Okay. Um, Now, with the illness and injury specifically, what's really cool about HRV is that we have this opportunity. We have this opportunity where we see somebody starting to dive down and we can start to collect some subjective data from that person and we can intervene. We can intervene with supplementation. We can intervene with rest, recovery strategies. We can intervene with all of these kinds of things and they can completely avoid that illness. They can completely avoid that injury. They can time their performance to make sure that they are their best. Okay, and finally, HRV helps us with these deeper insights. Okay, sometimes it's not the obvious things, right? It's not your workout program. It's not your diet, right? Maybe it's your sleep, but maybe you don't think that sleep is really a problem. But now that you're seeing, well, I have everything else hitting perfectly, maybe I should look into sleep, right? And then maybe you get your sleep tested and you find out that you have something like obstructive sleep apnea, right? Or that you're a major snorer and maybe it's not diagnosable sleep apnea, but you have sleep disordered breathing to a level that it impacts your health. Okay. Um, and of course, the self-responsibility that comes along with that. When you have an objective number staring you in the face every single day that says this is your HRV as a result of these things that you chose to do, now we know I need to not make those choices, like choosing to chop my sleep, chop my sleep short for some reason, like choosing to drink too much alcohol, like stuffing myself with unhealthy food. Okay. All of these things your HRV is going to scream at you about. Not only do you not feel great, okay, but your HRV, you will actually watch that number tank when you make poor decisions. All right. So the science of HRV, let's get into this. Okay, so HRV in its simplest form, what we're talking about is homeostasis. That's what we're measuring here. So homeostasis is going to be the maintenance of a constant internal environment despite our ever-changing internal and external environments, right? So we need to maintain a constant internal environment. That is the process. And in allostasis, the next one on here, is going to be the dynamic process of maintaining homeostasis. So that's essentially the work that needs to happen to maintain homeostasis. And allostatic load is the amount of processes that are happening at the same time. So the amount of stressors, we can look at this, that are happening at the same time that are challenging homeostasis. All right. And what is a stressor? So a stressor is anything in the internal or external environment that is challenging homeostasis. And I like to call these life metrics. Okay. I like to call these life metrics because then we can think about them as a brick, something that we can hold. And we can imagine that the more bricks that we pile on, right? If you have your arms out and you're carrying a load of bricks, if you have a small load of bricks, it's very easy to carry that. And it's very easy to change and do things, right? You can change directions. You can even do a game of hopscotch. You can kick a ball. You can do whatever you want when you're just carrying a few bricks, right? But when you are loaded down with a lot of stressors, right? A lot of these bricks, it's very hard to adapt to things in your environment. Okay. So not only might you not be able to do things like a simple game of hopscotch, right? But if somebody asks you a difficult question, is that easy or hard, right? Easier or harder when you're carrying a heavy load? Well, that's simple. It is way harder, right? Two plus two. What is that right now? Okay, that's no problem. Two plus two when I'm carrying a huge load of bricks. I don't care what two plus two is. I want to just yell at you because you asked me a question, right? That is the difference. That is that allostatic load. And we all have experienced that. When stressors are high, we have a lower function in every way. HRV is a measure of how we are handling that stress. So not only how much stress is on us, but more importantly, how we are handling that stress. Okay, so HRV allows the body to be adaptable and maintain homeostasis in the face of a dynamic environment. We thrive with high adaptability. In other words, we thrive with high HRV. All right. So let's talk about the autonomic nervous system. I believe I mentioned that at least once so far. And there are two parts of the autonomic nervous system that we are going to talk about today. And that is the sympathetic nervous system as well as the parasympathetic nervous system. First up, though, sympathetics. So this is our fight, flight, freeze, and our athletic side. And I like to call it our gas pedal side. And one important thing is that not all sympathetic actions are bad. Okay. Actually, in the short term, it's extremely beneficial, right? So a short-term stressor, we are going to have increased cortical activity, increased motor activity, increased immunity, right? These are wonderful things in the short term. If we maintain sympathetics on high, aka we maintain a large number of stressors that we cannot handle in a good manner, we are going to see decreased immune function, decreased mental function, decreased physical and emotional regulation. We're going to see widespread dysfunction begin to happen throughout our body. And how about parasympathetics? Rest, digest, and relax. Okay, so this is wonderful. I call this our brake pedal. Okay, this is touted as the wonderful side of our autonomic nervous system. However, if we have too much of this, it's not a good thing either. If we have too much parasympathetic activity, we're going to see a lack of motivation. We're going to see things like muscle cramping, poor circulation, breathing dysfunction, okay, and more. And that's actually a picture of my son. And he was very sick at the moment when this picture was taken, and he went to go to the bathroom, and I went to go check on him, and he had crapped out on the crapper. That was way too much parasympathetic activity for him, right? He was sick, his body was in full repair mode, parasympathetic, and he went to go use the restroom, which is more parasympathetic activity. So his body said, we're just going to go full parasympathetic in, zonk out. All right. Um, this is our long-term survival strategies, though, what our parasympathetic nervous system does. So this is our digestion, absorption, excretion, things like that. We're going to talk about neurotransmitter and hormone production and regulation, immune function, our sleep, repair, recovery, and so much more is happening over here, right? And what happens when we have an increased parasympathetic activity? We have an increased HRV. Okay, so for the most part, this is going to be a good thing, but we still need to have that autonomic balance where we see we have the capability of our sympathetics being able to engage, but quickly regulated by our parasympathetics. All right, and then finally, we can't talk about the parasympathetic nervous system without talking about our vagus nerve. So our vagus nerve is our wandering nerve. It goes from our brainstem, okay, way up here, all the way down to our gut, okay, and almost to the end of our digestive system. And that is going to control over 80% of our parasympathetic nervous system function. And over 80% of that is going to be what we call afferent, okay? And for those of you who are not in medical school or familiar with any of this stuff, what that means is that information is coming back to the brain. So from the periphery back to the brain. And what's cool about that is that if it's afferent information that it's mostly concerned with, we can actually influence that, and as a result, we can stimulate our vagus nerve in many ways, which helps with parasympathetic function. Okay. And vagal tone, finally, we're going to mention that word because it is very important. And vagal tone is the strength or activity level of your vagus nerve. And when we really break it down, that is what HRV is measuring most accurately, is the power of your vagus nerve, because that is what actually controls your heart rate. Okay, so strong vagal activity is going to have a lower heart rate, a higher HRV. All right, so how do we measure HRV? Well, this is simple. We're going to download an app. Okay, any HRV app will do. There are many great ones out there on the market. We're going to get a device. There are several great ones on the market, but you do have to be careful about which HRV device you pick. You want to make sure that it is open source and that it is capable of transmitting R to R intervals, and that it is sampling at least 200 samples per second. All right, and then we want to do and we're just going to simply start a reading after that. All right, so here's some great apps. All of these are wonderful apps to use. I'm partial to Optimal HRV just because I'm part owner of that company. But again, all of these are great apps to use. When we go to use an actual device, right, all of these are great kinds of, well, not all of them are great devices, but let me specify here, right? All of them are capable of reading HRV. Okay, our polar chest strap monitor is going to be one of the most accurate ways of doing it. Although you do have to actually lift your shirt up, put the chest strap on. Sometimes that can require extra steps like shaving and electro gel. Most of the time not, but hopefully for you that's not the case. A simple reader like this is great because it just goes right on your forearm. It's very easy to use. It's quick. You put it on for 3 minutes, you take it off, you're done with your reading. Something like an Aura Ring, these are great, but we don't want you to use the overnight data that it gives you. We want you to do a fresh reading in the morning. Same with something like an Apple Watch, same with something like a Whoop strap, okay? All these things are capable of giving HRV data. It's just we need to do it in a more specific way, and that's what we're going to talk about. Is when we take our HRV reading, we want our nervous system to be in the most reproducible, similar state as possible. So how we're going to do that is first thing in the morning. So literally, first thing when you wake up, you're going to wake up, get out of bed, use your restroom if needed, and then you're going to go into a seated position. And pardon me. And in that seated position, you are going to put on your HRV device. You are going to connect it to an app. You are going to sit quietly for 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how long your reading needs to be. And the things that we want to focus on is we want to focus on our eyes being open. We want to be taking natural breaths. We want to be having neutral thoughts as much as possible. And we don't want to interact with any other humans or animals for those 3 minutes. Okay, just 3 minutes of breathing. This guy's a poor example because his eyes are closed rather than open. And one other thing, we don't want you checking things like social media, emails, and whatnot prior. The reason why is because if you are checking those things, you may read an email, you may see a post on social media, etc., that may really send your autonomic nervous system into a spiral, most likely in the sympathetic direction, because let's be honest, most things that you see like that are not wonderful. Um, After our reading is done, we are going to tag our appropriate items. So we're going to give context to our reading by saying, last night I had alcohol. Last night I slept great. Yesterday I did X, Y, or Z, right? I started a new exercise program. I worked out and did this, and then I went for a run, and then I saw, maybe my extended family, and maybe that's a good thing for you, maybe it's not, okay? But all of these things are going to give context to your reading so we can understand these readings when we go back and look. Okay. Then we're going to look at our reading and crush the day as appropriate, right? Because that might mean that we are going for it, or it might mean that we are going to take it easy because our HRV is telling us it's a good day to take it easy. So speaking of how we interpret that data, let's talk about interpretation of HRV. So for the most part, a higher HRV is going to be better, right? There are some exceptions, and we can talk more about that on the more extended course. But for the most part, our higher HRV is better. Okay. This is not for diagnosis, right? I can't tell you that you're going to have a heart attack based on your HRV reading. Okay. I can't tell you that you have high cholesterol based on your HRV reading. But what we can tell you is that based on your series of HRV readings, your health is going in a negative direction, right? Or based on your series of HRV readings, your health is going in a positive direction. Now, when we add in that context of what's been happening in your life, we can determine what things are positive and negative for your health and what things will help you become a healthier, better person. Okay. So when we look at these things, you're going to get numbers, and typically they're going to be in what we call an RMSSD. Okay, so this first big reading down here underneath, and SDNN, some things do that, not all of them. But that's mostly our Apple devices are going to do that. Not sure why they do that. Apple's different, but RMSSD is what most readings are going to be in for our short-term readings, right? And this is looking at the actual time differences between beats. Now, we have this other thing called frequency domains, and I'm not really going to spend any time talking about this. Just know that there is a lot more data and a lot more knowledge to have about your HRV readings, and we can look into it on the back end when we start to understand the different frequencies within each HRV reading, okay? So baseline readings, this is something that we want to establish. So 4 to 7 days, we want to get a baseline of readings going, and that's what we have over here. So we can see that this person's HRV data, that their average for this week is right in the upper 70s, okay? And we can see that they started their week really low, they recovered really well, and then they've been challenging themselves this week and kind of taking out, and hopefully this person pardon me, uh, this person is going to look at this data and say, oh my, I am drifting down several days in a row now. That means that I am exposing myself to, right, I'm making myself more prone to injury, illness, low performance. So rather than go and push myself further today, maybe it's a good day to focus on recovery. Okay, so that I can see that HRV data start to creep back up. Okay, so that's what we are looking at here with our HRV data. That's when we need this baseline and these consistent readings. The most ideal would be every single day, but as long as you're majority of the days of the week, that is wonderful. All right, so we can look at this data from daily trends, right? So how does your power shift throughout the day? If I take an HRV reading early in the morning and then I take one at lunchtime, what happened to my HRV? And there's a good chance that it went down. And the reason why it went down is because from the moment that you woke up to lunchtime, you probably had additional stressors in your life, right? but maybe you had some really great things happen to you as well. And we might see that your HRV actually went up. Okay. That can be spending time with loved ones. That can be doing something that makes you feel very fulfilled. It can be mindfulness, meditation sessions, prayer sessions, anything like that, that can really bring your power back up. All right. We can also look at things like how does a meal, how does an exercise session, how does something like that affect your HRV? All right. And we can do that by looking at HRV immediately before and after, and then at 30, 60 minute, 90 intervals if we wanted to quote unquote test something and see how our body reacts to it. All right, weekly trends. Now, this is going to be the most useful for most of us. And this is going to tell us a lot about our weeks because what we'll start to notice over the course of weeks, months, years is that we have weeks. We start off on Monday. We're looking really good. And by the end of the week, our HRV has just consistently dwindled away, right? And that is because we are using our power little by little each day until we have nothing left in our tanks. Okay. And then what we can do with that data is we can choose to add our most important work in the beginning of the week where we are at our most powerful. And then at the end of the week, we can start to take away some of these things that I'm sorry, we can start to add in more recovery focused things so that the end of our weeks won't be so horrible, right? We'll actually have some energy left at the end of the week and we might be able to perform halfway decent. Okay, and then we can overlay trends, other trends with those too, like how to sleep play into this, um, and things of that nature. All right, then when we look out at the longer trends, we can see how vacations, we can see how major life events, work deadlines, quotas, holidays, ovulation, even lunar phases, right? We can look at how all of these things affect our HRV when we see these trends happening over the long term. All right. And in the online courses, we will get much more in depth about interpretation of HRV as well. But finally, we're going to talk about application of HRV in practice. And this is going to be very quick right here. And really what I want to talk about is just that HRV gives us this opportunity to take action. Okay. So when we see HRV and we know our trends each week, what we can do is we can strategically plan things. So we can strategically plan so that we can perform our best when it matters the most. We can put our most important work at times when we are our most powerful. And we can avoid pitfalls. We can avoid things like injury, illness. We can avoid decreased performance simply by following our HRV trends and putting things in place so that we can plan for the rough times and make sure that we lift ourselves up or just move things, right? And we can also plan for those really good times, right? Put our really important stuff over there. All right. So I always talk to my patients about imagining a basin of water, right? Like your sink. And we have our hot and our cold water pouring in. Our hot water being our stressors, right? Pouring down on us, and our cold water being what neutralizes the whole situation. Okay. And in life, right, sometimes we have these two options, right? Sometimes we can simply just turn down the hot water. We can say, hey, you know what? It's been a horrible week. It's super stressful. I'm just going to unload some of these things and push them off to next week. That's a great option. Great option if you can do that. Sometimes we don't have that option, right? We have deadlines that we have to meet. We have quotas that we have to meet. We simply can't let down a friend or something of that nature, right? So if we can't turn down that hot water, we can always turn up the cold water. Okay, and if we turn up the level of the cold water, what that means is it's doing things like HRV breathing biofeedback, and doing things like prayer, doing things like meditation, doing things like recovery exercises, doing things like more focused stretching rather than strengthening and being ourselves up type exercises, making sure that we're taking in positive nutrition, good hydration, all of these things to put more cold water in that basin to neutralize when we can't turn that hot water down. Okay. All right, and HRV biofeedback, I did mention that a couple of times in here, and I'm not going to get in depth at all in this little preview here, but what I wanted to mention is that this is a process of gaining deeper insights, connection, and control over your own physiology. So what HRV biofeedback does is it teaches you a way to naturally bring yourself out of these moments where you might be going off the rails per se, right? Or where you can see yourself trending down, trending down, trending down. You do this HRV biofeedback and it pulls you right back up. Okay. It's a wonderful tool and again, something that we'll talk more about in the online course. You can also, of course, just YouTube about HRV biofeedback. Dr. Ina Kazan out of Harvard is a colleague of mine and one of the best minds in HRV biofeedback. She literally wrote the textbook. Okay, so for our overview, this is what we just went through, all of these different steps. And finally, here's our options, right? If you wanted to, I do have a book specific for chiropractors, but you can really apply that to any kind of doctor, physical therapist, coach. Heart rate variability for chiropractors, which is a simple guide to applying HRV, and that is available on Amazon. If you want to take a full course, this is about a 5.5 hour online course. And this course is going to go through all things HRV, so extremely in depth on all things HRV. And there is a link there. I will also share a link below in the comments because I do not know that you will be able to click this link or not. But that course is being offered for just $495. And you will also get a free HRV device. In fact, this one right here, it is the optimal HRV device, which can be used with any app. And I will also be happy to give you free access to the optimal HRV app. Finally, if you want to get HRV in your practice, um, excuse me, I should have drinking water during this. If you want to get HRV in your practice, optimalhrv.com would be a place to go and check that out. And that is everything. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you learned something today, and I hope to interact with you again in the future. Have an awesome, awesome rest of your day.